vast pageant with himself in a scarlet uniform on a white horse, baton in hand, leading the British forces forward through the smoke of battle. As a 22-year-old junior officer fresh from the Royal Military College at Sandhurst, Churchill was torn between his youthful enthusiasm for putting his life on the line and the horror of the wars he fought in. His military experience as a soldier exposed him to the grit, blood, and death of war in its cruelest forms. His exploits left him with an abhorrence of war, and during the first 3 decades of the 20th century, his was a frequent, often strident, but forlorn voice, preaching preparedness and other means of avoiding war. However, when war engulfed the world for the second time in 25 years, Churchill answered the call. Where others talked of peace with Nazi Germany, his was the strongest voice among those determined to resist tyranny. Although he became perhaps the most famous politician in British history, Churchill never strayed far from his military roots. While political office and its myriad powers were his ultimate goal, he used soldiering, writing, and his experience as a war correspondent to that end. Politics may have dominated his life, but soldiering was a passion he never lost during his political rise. During the Second World War, he was frequently seen in the uniform of the Royal Air Force or in that of an army colonel. As one writer has noted, Wellington was a soldier who felt it his duty to be a politician. Churchill was a politician who wanted to be a soldier. A nation which, since Cromwell, has always felt uncomfortable with all but its most eccentric military leaders, was led in its most dangerous battle by a war leader in a zip suit and carpet slippers. Churchill possessed an unfulfilled lifelong ambition to become a warrior hero in the Napoleonic mold, which even service in the squalor of the front lines as a lieutenant colonel commanding a rifle battalion in France in 1916 failed to cure. Later in life he called war the greatest of all stimulants. As early as 1911, one of his critics remarked with insight, "He is always unconsciously playing a part, an heroic part, and he is himself his most astonished spectator. He sees himself moving through the smoke of battle, triumphant, terrible, his brow clothed with thunder, his legions looking to him for victory, and not looking in vain. He thinks of Napoleon. He thinks of his great ancestor, the Duke of Marlborough. In his fervid and picturesque imagination, there are always great deeds afoot, with himself cast by destiny in the Agamemnon role." Warts and all, Winston Churchill nevertheless represented the indomitable spirit of a defiant nation under siege. His oratory was stirring, and, like FDR's, his words galvanized his fellow countrymen. His predecessor as Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, regarded Hitler as the commonest little dog, but was duped and coerced by the German dictator's signature on the meaningless Munich Agreement in September 1938, a vaguely worded covenant that lacked even the ringing affirmation of non-aggression treaties. Chamberlain's well-intentioned declaration of peace in our time was actually a death warrant for France and a guarantee that Britain was destined for another war with Germany. When he learned of Munich, Churchill remarked, "This is only the first step, the first foretaste of a bitter cup which will be proffered to us year by year, unless by a supreme recovery of moral health and martial vigor we arise again and take our stand for freedom." Once war had come, and the Foreign Secretary, Lord Halifax, suggested that Britain make peace with Hitler, Churchill not only declined, but instead vowed to rescue mankind from the foulest and most soul-destroying tyranny which has ever darkened the stained pages of history. The Second World War was the greatest test of all, and much of the credit for Britain's survival belongs to Churchill, who simply refused to lose. His defiance of Corporal Hitler, as he scornfully referred to the Nazi leader, was on full display throughout the war, from his "we shall fight on the beaches" to his "we shall fight on for ever and ever and ever." In no particular order, Churchill was brilliant, pampered, petulant, romantic, pragmatic, courageous, egotistical, eccentric, possessed of enormous perseverance, opinionated beyond measure, and impossibly demanding. He drank too much, suffered from depression, his black dog, waddled rather than walked, and by almost any criterion ought to have been too old to carry the enormous burden of a prolonged war that threatened Britain's very existence. As a young man, he once said, "If I had 2 lives, I would be a soldier and a politician. But as there will be no war in my time, I shall have to be a politician." In the event, Winston Churchill was both. Although Churchill has been the subject of hundreds of biographies, very little has been written about the military Churchill. More than 40 years since his death in 1965, his attraction for